Welcome, everyone. My name is Rebecca Slayton. I am the director of the Judith Reppe Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies and an associate professor in the Department of Science and Technology Studies. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's event. This lecture is hosted by the Reppe Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies, which is part of the Einaudi Center for International Studies. It is co-sponsored by the Einaudi Center's Institute for European Studies and the Cornell Brooks School Tech Policy Institute. And Guðni Jóhannesson's visit is sponsored by the Messenger Lecture Series. I'd like to begin today's event by acknowledging that we are meeting on Cornell University's campus, which is located on the traditional homelands of the Guaycahonne, the Cayuga Nation. The Guaycahonne are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of Guaycahonne dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of Guaycahonne people, past and present, to these lands and waters. Now I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for today. Guðni Jóhannesson served as the 6th President of Iceland from 2016 to 2024. Running as an independent, he won the 2016 election with a plurality of the vote, becoming the youngest person ever to serve as Iceland's president. His approval rating reached an unprecedented 97% in his first term. During his years in office, he elevated Iceland's international profile and advocated for human rights, inclusive democracy, climate action, and renewable energy solutions. As a historian at the University of Iceland, his research focuses on modern Icelandic history. He has published works on the Cod Wars, not the Cold Wars.
Well, both. Also the Cold War.
Also that, yes. The 2008-2011 Icelandic financial crisis and the Icelandic presidency. So please join me in welcoming him as a 2026 Messenger Lecture at Cornell.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for these kind words of welcome, and thank you, good people of Cornell, for having been so generous and kind and hospitable. I've had a lovely few days here, and will bring back with me warm memories. And I look forward to talking here about Greenland, the last colony in Europe. But I must warn you, you heard I'm an expert on this and that when it comes to history, but I'm not an expert on Greenland. I decided to talk about this because Greenland is in the limelight, as it were, and because Greenland is our closest neighbor to the West. The Greenlanders are our neighbors and friends. And there are some similarities, and there are some connections in the past and present which make it justifiable for somebody from Iceland to talk about Greenland. But again, not an expert on Greenland. However, also, I served as head of state, and in that capacity, I got to know the leaders of the Greenlandic nation, and I got to understand and sympathize with their aspirations and hopes, and want to continue on that journey. Now, there is also this connection. Is there anyone from Norway in the room? Good, then I won't. Oh, there is a Norwegian. Half Norwegian. Well, I won't have to modify my talk still. But here you can see various images of what we know as the person Leifur Eiríksson, or what the Norwegian would call Leif Eriksson, or Leif Eriksson in English, I should think. Statues of him in Iceland and also here in North America. Also known as Leifur Heppni in Icelandic, Leif the Lucky, because on his journeys between Greenland and new lands for him to the west, he managed to help some shipwrecked people, hence Leif the Lucky. Now, there is a Leif Erikson Day here in the United States every year on the 9th of October. Now, why the 9th of October? It's not Leif's birthday. We don't know when he was born. No, it was because on that day in the 1820s, 1825, if I remember correctly, the first ship with Norwegian immigrants arrived from Stavanger in Norway to New York. So that date was chosen to commemorate and remember Leif the Lucky and his journey from Greenland to new lands in the west. Now, in the mid-1970s, Leif Erikson Day was celebrated as usual. But words of it, of the news announcement, reached the Icelandic embassy in Washington, D.C. And a formal protest was launched. Because the US administration, the presidential declaration on Leif Erikson Day said that today we honor Leif Erikson, the Norwegian explorer. Hold on! Leifur was not Norwegian. We feel, we Icelanders, and I'm exaggerating a bit, and I'm being a bit too conservative here to my liking, but we would like to say he was Icelandic, not Norwegian. Norway has nothing to do with it. And why choose 9th of October? Why not pick an Icelandic ship reaching US shores? So the State Department and the White House had to find a way out. You don't want to offend the Icelanders. They're our friends and allies. So this is, if somebody's studying diplomacy here, here's a lesson to be learned. They said, of course we will look into this. And the next presidential proclamation on Leif Erikson Day, and all proclamations since then have had this wording. Today we celebrate Leif Erikson, son of Iceland and grandson of Norway. And that has pleased us Icelanders hitherto. But now come to think of it, as the Greenlanders are moving from what was once a colonial status to whatever they wish to see in the future, we should maybe think, well, why not call Leif Erikson a Greenlander? Yes, he was born in Iceland, but he spent his childhood and adult years in Greenland. So if we are posthumously to award Leif the Lucky a passport, definitely not Norwegian. Icelandic, okay, but let's think about Greenland as well here. And this also connects to the fact that there are these connections, ancient connections between Iceland and Greenland. Now, there was Norse settlement in Greenland around the year 1000 and onwards. But it came to an end. Nobody is quite sure how, why, and when. You have to use whatever sources there remain, archaeological, oral tradition in Inuit population and so on, and your imagination. And I'm not going to go deep into that, but in 1721, this Danish missionary, Hans Egede, went to Greenland, and that is when you can say that the process of Danish colonization began in Greenland. Because at that stage, both Norway and Iceland had come under Danish rule. So then Denmark was the mighty power in the North Atlantic. And this statue stands high in Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, and you can see the Lutheran church there also in the background. Greenland is an Arctic island, an Arctic nation, an Arctic population, primarily Inuit. There are about 56,000 people living in Greenland now. And you can see most of the population or most of the land lies within the blue line there, the Arctic Circle, but in any case, those areas of Greenland that are further southwards, it is mostly covered in ice. And here you can see a typical image of a Greenlandic town, both wooden houses and blocks of flats. And in the late 20th century, there was a movement of people going from the traditional small villages on the coastline to the towns. Not without societal conflicts and complications, to be sure, because you move from being a hunter-gatherer population to people living in towns with all the challenges and problems that come with that. And we'll come back to that near the end of my talk. Now, what about, yes, I visited Greenland in 2017, and the language, of course, is totally different. Aleutic Eskimo language. When I was young, I was told that it was derogatory to talk about Eskimos, but if I understand correctly, in some ways, it's okay to talk about the Eskimo language and all the parts where that term is not considered derogatory. But Inuit is the word we use traditionally, at least in Icelandic. So I tried my best at speaking a bit Greenlandic, Inuit language there, Assasaka, Akkisuisut, Assasaka, Kalhait, Guyanak, etc., etc. But I had to read it out loud like that. But in English it read, "Dear hosts, dear Greenlanders, I thank you for your hospitality. I wish you all the best in this great country that you own and can give you and next generation such a promising future. With warm wishes from Iceland, thank you very much." And the way we were talking about, that's my wife Eliza there in that red shirt, talking about the future of Greenland, and we were in Nuuk visiting schools and other establishments. And there is definitely great interest in Iceland in fostering and strengthening all kinds of relations between Iceland and Greenland. But is Iceland an Arctic country? This ball, or whatever you would call it, this piece of rock, piece of concrete, lies on an island to the north of Iceland called Grímsey, the island of Grímur. And it depicts where the Arctic Circle lies, where it touches Icelandic territory, or actually where it did a few years ago, because the Arctic Circle moves. It's not static. And people got tired of moving this gigantic ball around. So there is a sign there, if I understand correctly, actually the Arctic Circle is a bit further north, because in 2047, the circle will have moved to the north of this island. So we have until 2047, if you like, to say that we are an Arctic island. Because after that, we're to the south of the Arctic Circle. Unless we count this tiny little island called Kolbeinsey, even further north, but that's slowly vanishing. And in a few decades it will be gone because of the pressures of sea and ice that are constantly eroding that island. So I'm only saying this half jokingly, but just to demonstrate that Iceland is not an Arctic country, an Arctic nation. There is no indigenous population in Iceland. And until very recently, the Icelanders would emphasize that no, we are certainly not Arctic. We want to have nothing to do with the Arctic region. We are Europeans. Take, for instance, this newspaper article in 1940, in the middle of the 20th century. The first thing that Icelanders say to foreigners is this: please understand that we are not Eskimos. Because that was maybe the image that the Icelanders feared, that we would be considered somehow inferior, somehow not European. Eskimos living in igloos. No, 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 that's not us. This was the spirit in Iceland in the middle of the 20th century. And it lasted for a while. Here you can see, I could call him Iceland's version of Bruce Springsteen. Very popular rock musician in Iceland. And this is from his album or song Greenland in 1983. I'm not going to sing it. When you are rising up, we look the other way. We cherish our color of skin. It's white, you know what I mean. This was I'm not saying this is the general feeling, but definitely in the 1940s and onwards, there was this feeling in Iceland that we are not Greenland. We are not Greenlandic. They have their problems, they have their challenges, they're different from us. And there was even an interest. Let us rule Greenland. Never official, never widespread. But there were associations in Iceland where resolutions were made that if anybody should rule Greenland, it should be Iceland, not Denmark, because of Leif the Lucky, our good old Icelander. And the Norwegians, they made formal challenges to Danish authority, and it was resolved before the International Court of Justice. The Norwegians wanted to have ownership of eastern Greenland and claimed that was their ancient right. So everybody was out there to get the Greenlanders, if you like. This interest still exists, of course, in maintaining the knowledge and our stories about Norse settlements in Greenland. But thankfully, today, the approach is totally different. And you will not find any reasonable Icelander claiming that we should have some kind of authority in Greenland or saying that we are somehow superior to the people of Greenland. This is just an aspect of colonialistic style thinking that you could detect in the 20th century, but fortunately is not here anymore because we live and learn, or at least that's what we try to do. So we move from outdated perceptions on how nations stand and where they are and what they're like to a more likable approach, if you like. So here you can see an image of Erik the Red, incidentally the father of Leifur the Lucky. Again, it goes without saying, we have no idea what he looked like, but if you want him to look like that image on the left, that's fine. And there are many connections. Even though Iceland is not an Arctic country in the same sense as Greenland, there are many ways in which to foster and strengthen the relationship between Iceland and Greenland. For instance, in the so-called West Nordic Council, where Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands cooperate in fields of culture, education, not hard politics, as it were, but other aspects. I had the privilege when I was head of state to welcome children from Greenland who were in Iceland to learn learn swimming and just acquaint themselves with Icelandic society. And there are other aspects of cooperation where we definitely can move on and do much more. And there is the Arctic Council, a cooperative body of nations and states that have legitimate interests in the Arctic. Cooperation there is more or less frozen now because of Russia's aggression and Russia's war in Ukraine, because Russia is part of the Arctic Council. But before the war in Ukraine, cooperation through the Arctic Council definitely was substantial. And then you have the Arctic Circle, a conference in Iceland every year where there is focus on Arctic affairs. So, here you have the history of Iceland in one slide. You know, that's quite impressive for somebody who usually cannot give an opinion without writing a book about it in 100,000 words. Free Commonwealth in the first centuries, covenant with the King of Norway, Danish rule, national awakening. We should be our own masters in our own home. We have our language, our culture, our own history, our own historical heritage. Leading to parliament, and separate constitution, home rule, sovereign state, royal union with Denmark, but Iceland independent to all intents and purposes in 1918. And then in 1944, the foundation of the Republic of Iceland and the severance of all formal ties with Denmark. The King of Denmark was not happy. This was in the middle of the Second World War, but the reply in Iceland was, we don't care. You can be unhappy, dear king, but we are forming our own republic. And ultimately it ended in peace, and the Danes are our good friends and allies now. Nothing wrong with that. UN membership, NATO membership, US-Icelandic defense agreement still in force. So this is, in a nutshell, with an emphasis on recent years and decades, the history of Iceland, if you like. Now, could the Greenlanders learn from this? Is there anything here that might serve as a blueprint? Yes, there is. Here's a comparison with Iceland and Greenland. 18th century, 1721, Hans Egede, missionary, Danish rule established. At the end of the Second World War, Greenland was considered within the UN a Danish colony, just like other colonies around the world, hence the last colony in Europe. But the status was changed unilaterally by the Danes, not by some deep discussion with the Inuit population or anything like that. No, Greenland became a county in Denmark. There was a national awakening of sorts compared to Iceland in the 1970s in Greenland, where there was greater awareness that we, the people of Greenland, have our history, our culture, our traditions, which we should preserve and maintain and strengthen. And we should not disappear and just become people living in a block of flats in Nuuk. Home rule in 1979, home rule in 1904, increased sovereignty in 2009, 1918, sovereign state, you can see the comparison. And a few years ago, a draft constitution appeared in Greenland. And I actually, here you can see the rock band Sumus. Since I introduced you to Bubbi Mortens of Iceland, here's a Greenlandic rock band, Sume. And you can read into their album cover that appeared in 1973. That's one mythical tale from an Inuit attacking a Norse settler, if you like. And they were part of this wave to strengthen Greenlandic identity. Of course, Greenland is rich in many ways. On that map to the left, you can see a map of mineral resources, all kinds. It's rich in so much of that kind. There is farmland in Greenland. Parts of it are green, definitely. Tourism, back in the day, Rostungur. What on earth is Rostungur in English again, Halla? Walrus, the Beatles, walrus. Now I remember it. You always have to find a way to remember things. Walrus teeth were a precious entity in the Middle Ages. And fisheries. Greenland has rich fishing grounds all around. So there are so many opportunities for the people of Greenland to prosper, to run their own affairs, to be the masters in their own house, just like we wanted and did. How will they go about it? Like I said, the blueprint is there with the history of Iceland if they want to, and we're definitely willing to help. One of the people who has been instrumental in helping the people of Greenland to determine what they want to do is a man called Guðmundur Alfredsson, an Icelandic scholar and lawyer who has written many learned articles and overviews on the status of Greenland and the possible way ahead, including free association as a means to go one step further from the current status. I once received the Constitutional Committee of Greenland when I was in office, and those images are from the presidential residence in Iceland. And that was a very informative meeting for me. So there are examples, but the bottom line must always be that it is up to the people of Greenland themselves to decide what they want to do. And if they want some kind of advice and assistance, I should think that we, as their closest neighbors in Europe, would be there to help. There is interest from others in Greenland, as you may know. Indirect warnings or threats about taking Greenland, even by force, if necessary. This has admittedly subsided a bit, but definitely caused consternation in Greenland, not to mention Denmark, where the kingdom of, Greenland is part of the kingdom of Denmark, and all kinds of words in this direction had to be protested as they were. And while the situation is not as volatile or sensitive as it was maybe a year ago, there is still this feeling that you never know what's going to happen next when it comes to the US and Greenland. So I cannot predict. The worst thing you can do as a historian is to predict what happens next. It's bad enough trying to find out what happened in the past. So I'm not gonna risk going into the future. But I should think that in a democratic country, the principle of self-determination should be paramount when you look at peoples and states outside your own shores. The Danes, for them, this sudden, violent interest in Greenland was a wake-up call. In defense matters, for instance. The impetus in Washington, D.C. was that the Danes have not been taking care of Greenland's defenses against Russian interests, against Chinese interests, or against whatever interest there is. So therefore, the US is forced to take a closer look at the situation. And to be sure, yes, the Danes had not been investing heavily in military infrastructure or presence in Greenland. And for them, this was a wake-up call in that sense. And in other senses as well. The Danes are nice. A democratic country in Europe, affluent, and we Icelanders enjoy good relationship with Denmark and other Nordic countries. Just came out a report yesterday about the state of happiness in the world, or happiness report. I don't know how they value happiness, but in any case, Iceland is number 2, the second happiest country on earth. That's quite something. The Finns lead the way. They're number 1, but these Scandinavian nations are up there. Finland number 1, Iceland number 2, I think it's Norway 6, Denmark 8, or something like that. Can't exactly remember, but I remember we're number 2. And it's fun, it's great to be number 2, but still, what is it with the Finns? Why are they ahead of us? And they've been doing that for years. And I once asked a Finnish friend of mine about this, and he said, and we also love the Finns, and I'm not making fun of the Finns, but they, like, I know my accent is a bit strong sometimes, but the Finns have a really strong English accent. And I said, you know, what is it? What's it is about Finland and happiness? And he replied, well, I don't know. But if we are the happiest nation on earth, that says a lot about the world today. They are stoic, they are quiet. They drink a lot of coffee. Maybe that's the reason. We also drink a lot of coffee. But there I was talking about our good friends, the Danes. But they have also some things to answer for when it comes to the relationship between Denmark and Greenland in the 20th century. To be a colonial, and then you can put it like semi-colonial master, brings responsibilities and mistakes that have to be admitted and amended. The social situation in Greenland is problematic in many ways. The suicide rate is very high. There's misuse of alcohol, sexual abuse. all kinds of societal challenges that in some ways can be attributed to the fact that there was this attempt to move and change a way of life in a generation or two. Children were taken to Denmark without the consent of parents and made to learn Danish instead of their Inuit language. There was a program of forced or for sterilization. And yes, before that, there is a phrase in Danish, to be as drunk as a Greenlander. And it's in your dictionary. You can find it online. It's derogatory. The Danes will say, well, we also say there's a term, to be as drunk as a Swede. And I think that's okay, because the Swedes are affluent, the Swedes are rich, the Swedes can take it. But this is one rule, for instance, in humor, which you're always meant to observe. You make fun of a person who can take it. You don't make fun of those who are somehow in a weaker position than you are yourself. Because I loved it when people made fun of me when I was head of state. I can take it, I'm rich. I have a high position. You. Who are you making fun of me? So the Danes can say as much as they want about drunken Swedes, but this is derogatory. This is showing that the Greenlanders are not like us. And we don't want that in the 21st century. Not to mention a system of sterilization. It has been calculated that without that program, where girls and young women thought they were just having a medical examination, but a contraceptive was installed without their knowledge, let alone consent. Without that program, the people of Greenland would be thousands more now. And I know personally a young Greenlandic woman. And imagine trying for years to have a child, and you don't know why it's not happening. Because you want to control how society works, and you think it's for the greater good. That cannot be done in civil societies today, or it can never be done. So the Danes have to owe up to that, and that they have been doing, admittedly. Here you can see the Prime Minister of Denmark saying sorry to Greenland Inuit for heartless social experiment. And you can read more about this if you like. So this is what we need to look at when we look at how Greenland has moved from colonial status to the present. Now I'm happy to take questions about this, and I want to be optimistic, but also realistic. It is a small population in a gigantic landmass, 56,000 people or so today, and it has been forecast that the population will actually go down because of decreased fertility rates. That in the middle of this century, all things as they are, there will be about 50,000 people living in Greenland, because there's also this impetus to move away, to make your fortune somewhere else. So can we foresee a completely independent Greenland? Well, let's see what the people of Greenland want to do. But I should think that with us in Iceland, we have a defense agreement with the US. We're members of NATO. We know we don't have a military. We know we cannot defend ourselves completely on our own in a harsh world. So I should think that that would also apply to Greenland. And at the moment, there is no substantial clear willingness to sever yet more, let alone completely, the ties with Denmark. And there is willingness in Denmark to foster and strengthen Greenlandic society, and let us hope that that will just continue. But it's all in a state of flux, not made better by US statements recently, and the future is uncertain. Having said that, at the end of the day, let the people of Greenland be the masters in their own house, and let them decide how they shape their own future. I see that message reinforced here in Cornell. This was the first and only lawn sign I've seen here. when I took my jog down by the river on this one-lane bridge. It's very close to that. So the message from Cornell is clear, and I hope it will stay that way. Takk fyrir. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. We're now open to questions. I'll keep a list and moderate. To get on the list, put up a hand. If you have an immediate follow-on and a question that's just been asked, put up 2 fingers. I also want to mention that we are recording. So if we decide, there's a good chance that we will decide to include questions online, so you should just be aware of that. So Magnus, I see you first. Please keep up your hands for a minute so I can make a list. And please introduce yourself when you ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to Cornell. My name is Magnus Th. I am Swedish and half Norwegian.
Yes.
And that is my lawn sign.
That is your lawn sign. Well, I thought, will I be arrested if I'm taking a photo there of on somebody's property? But I guess I get, after the event, permission to take this photo and use it.
You have my permission, and everybody has the permission. Thank you very much for spotting it. But I have a question too.
Yes.
I have one comment, is that I think I'm very suspicious of the American intentions, and I was a little bit surprised when you mentioned the American complaints about Danish investments in security, because the Americans are the ones that have disassembled 30 bases and left all their garbage on the bases, not cleaning it up even, and then complaining about the landmarks are very hypocritical. So I suspect it's about vanity, and it's about the tech oligarchs who want a playground in Greenland, probably. But I don't know. But I would like to ask, there was also a new ambassador who was going to Iceland and said that he was anticipating being appointed governor of Iceland. And this caused a big uproar, and I wanted to ask if Icelanders are worried that they are next after Greenland.
No, we're not worried, but yes, you're absolutely right. And the Danish reply to these US allegations about the Danish authorities not taking seriously Greenland's defense interest has been both on the record and off the record. I should think that, you Americans just let us know what you want and we will find a way and we will just do this. We can just do this together. We're allies in NATO. So just discuss what we need to do together and we'll do it. You don't have to take over Greenland. You didn't have to. Like the US did unilaterally what it wanted in Greenland during the Cold War. And so you don't have to annex a nation to defend your defense interests. Talking about jokes and how well they are received or not, yes, this ambassador designate replied to a question, yes, you're going to be the next governor of Iceland, aren't you? And he said, yes, maybe, who knows? And there was laughter all around wherever that was in the United States, but not in Iceland. In these sensitive days when you never know, are we taking him seriously or not? But no, there is no sense of insecurity of that kind in Iceland. There are limits, or at least I hope.
Great. Question.
Hi, so not to...
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Braden, I'm a public policy student. Not to speculate on what the American intentions are with Greenland, as you have mentioned, there's national security potentially or a distraction from other things, but it is known that Greenland does have untapped natural gas and oil supplies, and that there are currently protections in place by the Greenlandic people to not tap into that for environmental purposes. So speaking on the United States and other nations' desire to have Greenland on the basis of potentially oil, and then if Greenland does become a sovereign nation, do you think that they will roll back some of those policies to make themselves a more affluent nation?
I don't know. I repeat my warning about predictions about the future, but nations have to begin with survive and then thrive. I would hope that all considerations about natural resources and their exploitations would be done in a sustainable way. And I should think with how the people of Greenland usually perceive nature and the value of nature, that they would not go all the way to get as much profit as quickly as possible and not worry about any future considerations. I should think that there would be a balance sought out there that would be in line with sustainable thinking.
Can you speak up just a little?
Sure. My question is about diplomacy. So I was noticing as you're speaking that you have a multicolored wristband, and I'm wondering, does it change depending on the national Icelandic mood? Does it change depending on whether you're speaking to Icelanders, Greenlanders, or Europeans?
No, actually, this was given to me, or this is actually not the original wristband. But I was elected president in the summer of 2016 and took office on the 1st of August. And on the 2nd or 3rd was my first public appearance, if I remember correctly, in Reykjavik, the capital. And that was the Pride Parade. And there was just this volunteer here who noticed me there and said, "You don't have a wristband," and gave it to me. And I said, "Yeah, oh, thanks, brilliant." And I've worn one ever since. Happily so. Iceland is not a perfect society, but the spirit of inclusiveness and personal freedom is quite rich there. So the Pride Parade, for instance, in Iceland is attended by people from all walks of life and all genders and whatever, and it is a sort of testimony to individual freedom. So I wear this day and night and have done since the 2nd or 3rd of August in 2024, including receiving dignitaries like Vice President Mike Pence, or shaking hands with, before 2022, President Putin of Russia, and they have not been offended, but I don't know what they've been thinking, but it's not my not my problem.
Please.
Hi, my name is Arpit Chaturvedi. I, until recently, headed a think tank in New Delhi, in India, and now I advise the private sector. My question to you is that when the United States of America makes such comments about taking over Denmark, etc., how seriously is it taken in countries over there, including in Iceland? Do you seriously think that the US would act on it? And number two, with the Arctic being increasingly more, geopolitically securitized, is more military investments, etc., in the agenda in Iceland and?
Well, there are constant talks about the changing Arctic scenario. The Arctic is warming up in more ways than one. So global warming is happening at a way faster rate up there. Sea lanes are opening up, possibly, although unlikely in the next few decades, for safe, secure, predictable commercial shipping. It's still risky to sail up there. Anything can happen. So it's not viable for the traffic that is now going from, say, Southeast Asia to Europe and North America and vice versa. I remember initially when there were some voices coming from Washington, not necessarily directly from President Trump, but others, that the United States had some designs on Greenland, that it was not taken seriously, it was just some noise. Sure. But then that noise increased and became more assertive and aggressive. And for certain, the authorities in Denmark had to take it very seriously and respond by words and actions. We in Iceland are blessed by the fact that we don't have an army, but at the same time we realize that we have to have a defense agreement. There is solid support for NATO membership. The question now is whether, with the situation as it is now within NATO, is NATO to be relied on? Yes, people would still say. But there are some saying, maybe we need to take a closer look at Europe. What's happening in Europe? Is the European Union becoming more of a force when it comes to security? I don't think so. But well, I'm a historian. And when people say to me now, look, this has never happened before. The world has never been so unpredictable, so risky, so dangerous. I will say like, come study history with me.
Hi, my name is Stephen Braden. I want to follow up on your recent comments on the increasing volatility in the North Atlantic and how the United States is increasingly being viewed as a less stable partner. Iceland just recently will be having a vote in August to vote on whether to continue EU accession. Do you think that the European Union is a potential counterpoint to additional interests when it comes to Iceland and when it comes to Greenland? If Greenland became independent, membership in the EU would be a way to have a common defense treaty, for example. Do you think the European Union could, in the future, perform more of a role in this? And if so, do you think they should?
Well, I will definitely not comment on the last, whether they should. That's for them to decide. And they are still them in the eyes of us Icelanders. We have never been a member of the European Union. But as was mentioned in the question, if things go as they stand, later this year, there will be a referendum in Iceland where the good people of Iceland will be asked, do you want the government of Iceland to enter into negotiations with the European Union about possible membership? A similar development occurred in 2009, immediately after the banking crisis that hit Iceland severely. The then government of Iceland decided to enter into negotiations with the EU, and they did not lead to anything. But at that time, security was not part of the equation, as it were. Whereas now, as has been mentioned, the security scene seems to be more volatile. NATO not as stable, the US or the transatlantic relationship not as stable. So I think for many in Iceland, deliberations about whether to join the EU or not have taken on this security dimension as well. Greenland is not part of the EU, even though Denmark is. The Greenlanders voted out of the EU. They had their own Brexit of sorts, way before Brexit. And I don't know, actually, I must admit my ignorance here, what they are thinking now about potential EU membership. But I think when it comes to fisheries, for instance, and it pleases me to be able to mention fisheries here, fisheries will mean a lot to Icelanders. It took us a few Cod Wars that were alluded to get all the foreigners out of the waters around Iceland. So the message you will hear now, just this morning, I was going through Facebook comments and I saw one from a good friend of mine who said, my grandfather did not take part in the Cod Wars just to let those foreigners in again. So that will figure more than security concerns, I think. Yes, we have many questions here.
Hi, my name is Paul. I'm a public administration student and the founder of the Cornell Negotiation Society here. My question is on Greenland's relevance increasing. We see multiple things coming together in terms of security, in terms of rare minerals. The world is looking to the global north for potential data center development, the global far north to be specific. Does this relevance that you're talking about for Greenland and in general give Greenland leverage in its conversations with Denmark, in its conversations with the United States or other actors to negotiate or to make itself the center of these conversations? Definitely.
Well, there was once a leader of an indigenous group who said to an anthropologist who was visiting and studying, well, our problems really began when other people started taking an interest in us. There might be people in Greenland thinking the same way. However, it's almost logical in any situation that if others see something that really belongs to you and they have an interest in it, your leverage should increase. And I cannot pinpoint to anything exactly, but the notion is that all this hype, all these discussions around Greenland and the US and the future of Greenland have increased awareness in Copenhagen, in Denmark, that you need to increase your attention and awareness about the future of Greenlandic society. You need to make sure that people will be able to lead a happy, healthy life there, and we must do our part there. Not just say, well, it's such a difficult situation up there, we will do our best, but let's just see how far that takes us. That kind of thinking is not acceptable anymore, thanks in some ways to the leverage that the people of Greenland now have through increased interest in their geopolitical position, and yes, of course, the resources that lie underneath that massive glacier. Yeah.
Thank you. Ben, I'm a PhD student in history and German studies. And coming from the humanities, I wanted to ask you, you've said a couple of times, I'm not going to predict things. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what's the responsibility and what are the limitations of academics to comment on contemporary events, to engage or run for office maybe even in contemporary politics, especially also recognizing that we're not always experts on the topics we're talking about.
Yeah. Here I am talking about Greenland, and remember the caveat. I said it twice. I'm no expert on Greenland. But when this idea was discussed initially, that I might come over here and lecture and talk, I could immediately sense that there is so much interest in the Arctic and in Greenland. And I remember this vividly. I mentioned the banking crisis in Iceland. I was an academic then, and I wrote a book about it. I'm the author of The Collapse, a book I wrote called The Collapse. Some people just blame me for the collapse. And then you could have what I called parachute academics. All of a sudden, you would find people who had no deep background knowledge of anything Icelandic, but they sensed there was an interest in Iceland. It's an interesting case study. And they would fly over, spend a week or two, talk to some people, and they had no idea who these people were, what their interest was, and they would be like anonymous sources and skew the story to fit their own purposes. You could see this when you're Icelandic, but not when you're a parachute academic. So be careful when you see a site of interest and you take an interest in it. It's a risky business. You need to know the background, says somebody who's talking about Greenland and not being an expert on Greenland. But I'm an expert on Iceland, the next country. I was focusing on the connection. And we academics do have a duty. We do have a duty to engage. Because if not, we were just in our ivory tower, listening to each other, writing papers for each other, publishing books read by another historian, and not making an impact at all. Having said that, and this is my downfall as a president, when I was campaigning, and nobody dares stopping me. I know we're running out of time, but I will just give you a story.
We're going to 1:15.
Okay, brilliant.
We have 20 minutes.
All right, so this is only a 15-minute story. When I was campaigning, I gave a stump speech. And I was never in politics, only in academia. And I would say what I stood for, what I wanted to see in Icelandic society, and how I wanted society to progress, and what I wanted to emphasize and not. And then I would say, having said that, however, on the other hand, because we academics, we're trained like this. We're meant to see the other point, the other view. And we're meant to take into consideration all kinds of aspects. Whereas if you're in a political position or public position, like the office of president in Iceland, no. You need to have one view, one image to portray, one line for people to take in. So after my speech, my PR friend would say, I would say, didn't I do okay? People were fine, it seemed. And he said, yes, you did okay, until you started saying, having said that, however, on the other hand. Until you became an academic again. They don't want an academic. They want a leading figure. And when you're head of state, you're meant to unify. You're meant to be optimistic. Academics are meant to be pessimistic. I wouldn't go that far. I didn't say that. But they're meant to be critical. Never think, what's best for the state? What's best for my fellow citizens? Well, sometimes it's just best to be critical. So if this is a long answer to a short question, we need to engage. Yes, for certain. Okay, next question.
My name is Andrew McKenna. I'm a PhD candidate in the history department, and I want to ask you a history question.
Yes?
You mentioned the importance of the national awakening of the Greenlandic people in the 1970s and how self-determination is the key for them going forward. What I'm wondering is, what role did non-Indian people have in this national awakening? So the Danish minority would exist in Greenland, even now some Southeast Asians who have moved into Greenland. What role did they have then? What role do you imagine them having now?
Well, again, I'm not the expert, but this I know. Many Danes who move to Greenland become as passionate about that society and as determined to make it as good as possible as Inuits who have their roots there for generations. Greenland is a complex society. It's not just one entity. There are differences between the Inuits in the Western Greenland and Eastern Greenland. And in recent years, yes, there's been a fair influx of people from Southeast Asia. If I remember correctly, there are a little over 100 Icelanders resident in Greenland now, but well over 1,000 people from the Philippines with a Philippine passport. And in a nation of 50,000, that's quite substantial. And if the Greenlanders, for instance, want to increase the tourism industry in Greenland, they actually need labor, people who are willing to live and work in Greenland, in hospitals, in restaurants. They need people from abroad. And will those people be determined to settle and live in Greenland? That remains to be seen. But you are absolutely right to point out and highlight that a substantial part of the population in Greenland derive from Denmark. But I would add that many in that category are as Greenlandic, if you like, as the Inuits.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Can't hear.
Oh, yeah. So I'm also coming from here. So my question would be, how can small states like Iceland and Greenland remain strategic autonomy in a world dominated by great power?
Yeah, well, we should just make that world not dominated by great power. We should rely on international law, and we should foster the rock-solid belief and determination that force is not what runs the show, that might does not make right. This route was taken in the 20th century. For instance, the UN is not perfect. Not many things wrong there, but this emphasis on international law and self-determination of nations before that, and the idea that you cannot use force to have your will against other independent states. This is the only defense that will work in perpetuity, if you like, for Iceland. We will never consider ourselves or never take the option that, okay, everybody has to arm. That is the way the world works. It will never work like that for Iceland. So our defense, our hope, and our future all rest on others, the mighty powers in this world, respecting international law, respecting principles of human rights, democracy, fairness, and so on. So we have a voice, I think, as well. Sometimes small nations can make a difference that far exceeds their size. Small nations can be this voice of morality rather than force. So I think we should make ourselves heard, and that should be the message.
Just a follow-up question on that comment, President. What is the incentive for the superpowers, as we see and call them, to respect international law, respect human rights, respect the sovereignty and self-determination of the less powerful countries, whom, in fact, they are financially aiding? And now when we see the superpower cooperation is themselves, they are not cooperating, what is the incentive for them to respect international law, human rights, and
Well, one would hope that if in a democracy, the leaders in that democracy behave in the way that you are describing, that the voters in that country will have a good sense of not voting people in who have policies like that. So we rely on you.
Hi, my name is Andy. First of all, thank you very much for being here and doing these lectures. It's been extremely interesting. My question isn't related specifically to Greenland, but what I was wondering about is, I've read that Iceland has been consistently ranked as having the lowest crime rate out of countries in the world, and so I was wondering, how has Iceland achieved that, and then what could other countries learn from Iceland in this regard?
Yes, well, again, Iceland is a wonderful country. And one of the reasons is that there is a relatively low crime rate. But I don't want to sound like a used car salesman. There are also things that are not okay in Iceland. Many things we can do so much better. Maybe it is the smallness and social cohesion that still remains, that we try to help out each other, especially in times of distress. Like Icelanders argue about large things, small things. We have bitter disagreements now about the EU, for instance. And sometimes people lose it and go way beyond what is considered acceptable in debates. So we have our disagreements and arguments. But when we're faced, for instance, with natural disasters, avalanches, storms, people missing, people lost in the interior, everybody helps out. The car mechanic, the doctor, the nurse, the teacher, everyone in the rescue squads, they volunteer and we go out and try to help each other. And maybe that is one reason why Iceland ranks high in what you mentioned and in the happiness category and so on and so forth. We still have the benefits of being small. Being small is sometimes good. Being small means that you know each other. Being small also means that everybody knows everything about everyone. It's like a small village, which is not so good sometimes. But this is maybe one of the factors. And I was in this high office, and I enjoyed the privilege of not having constant physical protection around me. That's one of the reasons why I took on this position. It would have been different, I think, had it been like it is in many other larger countries.
Hi, my name is Parveen. I'm a second year PhD student in the government department. And my question is kind of tied to Paul. So with leverage, how do you also mitigate culture as well? We talked about, for example, the data centers, but there's also this identity of protecting.
Yeah.
So what is the plan to mitigate this leverage, but also the inherent culture of the nation?
Well, if we're looking at Iceland, we are determined to not protect, but to strengthen the good old Icelandic language, the language that has been spoken on that island for well over 1,000 years, the language of the Icelandic sagas, stories about Leifur the Lucky and others. And how do you do that in today's world? How do you make sure that a small language like Icelandic survives in the digital age, in the age of globalization, where English is the lingua franca? Well, for one, you need to make sure that in all these gadgets we have, you can speak Icelandic. We must teach Siri and Alexa and all the others to speak Icelandic, because otherwise we're doomed. Otherwise, people will not use Icelandic. And this is one thing I did as president. I visited Silicon Valley. I went to Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, Apple, and I told them whatever software and hardware you make, you must make sure that there's space for smaller languages, and not just for us Icelanders, for everyone. For the Greenlanders with their Inuit languages, for indigenous populations all over the world. mean, even Danish is a small language in the larger scheme of things. So this is one part that is very much in our minds as we want to be global citizens, and we realize that the world is shrinking in so many ways. We get our entertainment from outside our shores, but at the same time, we want to maintain our separate identity. It's a complex issue, of course. Iceland is rapidly changing with immigration, where people come to Iceland to live and work in peace with others, but not necessarily fluent in the language. It goes without saying. It's a difficult language to learn. So it doesn't happen overnight. So we must be understanding and inclusive as well. But the message must be, on that island, Icelandic is the language that you need to know if you want to be an integral part of society. And it's not an unfair demand, in my opinion.
Okay, so I see 3 hands. I have 4 people. Keep your hands up. I have 4 people on my list, and 7 minutes plus those 3 hands.
Yeah, I will just answer with yes and no from now on.
No. This is great. We're going to go in emergency mode. I want everybody to get their question in. So I'm going to group them. I'm going to ask people to we'll do groups of 2, okay? So Sebastian, and then I have you next. Please keep your hands up and I'll make a note.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to know why, if you're not an expert on Greenland, why did you decide to talk about today about Greenland and not only about Iceland?
Well, I thought there was an interest in Greenland, and I thought there was an interest in how we in Iceland perceive the situation. So that was my take on it, and I justified it with that this is a nation so close to us, and when I was in office, I had dealings with our friends in Greenland, and I felt it could be a useful addition to the debate for everyone interested in the Arctic and Greenlandic affairs to get this image of a historian from Iceland and former president and his take on the issue.
Okay, we're actually going to do all 6 questions. We got 6 minutes. You want to take notes?
Possibly, yeah.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have you next, please.
Christopher Young, Department of Sociology. So first of all, I forgot that you were responsible for the collapse, so thank you.
Yeah. Late apologies.
But I do want to tell you, you mentioned this colony to, I wanted to think about the difference between a colony and a county, because, such similar words, but I wonder if it meant anything in the context of Greenland, or if it was just a nice relabeling.
It definitely meant, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Unless it's like 32 seconds.
Yeah, it's very short. Yeah, it definitely meant a lot in terms of how Greenland was viewed in judiciary terms within the Danish kingdom and constitutionally outside the borders of the Kingdom of Denmark. It did not, you did not have to report to the United Nations about how you are handling this colony. Now it's just part of Denmark, problem solved.
Great.
Sorry. Hi, thank you for the presentation. So we're just building on your point about like immigration and immigrants in Iceland and Greenland and other places, and seeing all of those like great powers fighting over territories in Europe now. So how that will be seen in the global south, and how that would reflect there, especially as people from the global south to move up, obviously for cheap labor.
Mm-hmm.
So even all of those fighting up there, how the global south would see that, or why would they move up to work for you guys while you're fighting?
Yeah.
Okay, now hold that thought.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Agnes Imark. I'm affiliated with the Refi Institute. I have a question regarding your membership in NATO, Iceland's membership in NATO. So we could see that you became member of NATO in '49, that you told us that you don't have standing army, just Coast Guard, right? And that you are not one of the Arctic nations, right? Considered Arctic nation. So I have 2 questions. One is about, did Trump administration influence Iceland to increase the budget contribution to 5% of GDP? And also, recently, the NATO countries decided to contribute more into Arctic security, once the tensions rise with Greenland. I just wanted to ask if you are part of this kind of increase, work on Arctic security with Iceland.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Hi, Matthew. I'm a freshman in the Brooks School of Public Policy. I have the same question. I was wondering how Iceland's not having a military conflicts with the 2% requirement previously, and now the 5% of GDP that needs to be spent on military for NATO members.
Mm-hmm. Ibrahim, first year MPA at the Brooks School. In your presidency, you were overseeing the response to COVID, which we all lived through. You used the C19 tracing app, the COVID.is information system, etc. How did that period change how you think small countries can use technology, not just for crisis response, but to help the local economy become more competitive in that?
Adrian, a government econ student. I had a question about how Greenland can overcome the fact that Denmark subsidizes like 50% of its budget, and whether Iceland had similar problems in the past when declaring independence, and whether Greenland can overcome those problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It declares independence.
Okay, last question. And mine, I'll apologize in advance. This comes from genuine curiosity. Your last slide about the forced sterilization of people in Iceland going to Denmark, and the thing that I remembered is I believe Iceland does not have Down syndrome because, and I know that's force and choice, but I just wondered if you could comment on
Yeah, well.
2 minutes, bro.
Yeah. Yeah, global south and conflicts. There's been substantial immigration to Iceland in recent decades. About 20-25% of the population now are either born abroad or their parents were born abroad. Most of those come from Europe, primarily Poland, to work in construction or just live and work in Iceland. So whether, I don't know whether the potential for some kind of tension near our shores has an effect on immigration in Iceland. That would not necessarily be the first link of that would come to your mind. NATO and GDP, now I'm just a historian, and the office of president in Iceland is not political on a day-to-day basis. So this would be a question for the prime minister and the foreign minister and the cabinet. But what I do know for sure is that the authorities in Iceland are well aware of the insistence, for instance, in the US, that the other NATO countries must, increase their defense expenditures. But traditionally, Iceland has often been taken outside or treated as an exception because we have no army. And it's difficult to expend your military expenditure when you have no military. Having said that, there are many ways to contribute, and Iceland is certainly doing that, including in the Arctic. But I can't say, to be honest, whether the current administration has been totally in line with other Nordic countries when it comes to that, or whether we still get some exceptions. COVID, it was never under my jurisdiction, as it were, as head of state. This would be for the prime minister at the time. What I would take from the pandemic years in Iceland is that while people disagreed and will disagree on how far the authorities went, and there was always substantial majority for decisions taken by the authorities. And the COVID measures in Iceland were, by and large, way less restrictive than they were in other countries. And maybe our smallness helped there, and the social cohesion. People would say, well, I am not sure, I believe all this stuff, but I am not going to, I'm going to make my own decisions based on what I think is in the general interest of the whole population, something like that. What was the fifth one? Greenland and, I can't remember now.
Economic subsidies.
Pardon?
Subsidies from...
Yes, subsidies from Greenland. Yes, the Greenlandic economy, Greenlandic society is heavily supported by the Danish authorities, to be sure. But during the independence struggle between Iceland and Denmark, the argument, for instance, in the 19th century, well into the 20th, was that, you've been getting so much from us throughout the centuries that it's only fair that you help us out a bit, or if you put it like that you have been making money out of Iceland for centuries. The Greenlandic politicians are well aware that it is in no way sensible or smart or desirable to sever ties with Denmark. That is not on the table. And there is a similar understanding in Denmark that there are obligations and needs that need to be met in Greenland. And if you're part of the Kingdom of Denmark, then it is your responsibility to answer those needs. So there will, in the foreseeable future, be this system whereby money will be, public money will be used to run society in Greenland, to run the healthcare system, the educational system, and social policies, and subsidized travel, and so on and so forth. That's just the way it has to be because of the nature of society in Greenland. The Downs question in Iceland is a sensitive one, and I do remember that from my years as head of state. I do remember when we commemorated Down Syndrome Day, isn't it the 20-something of March, in line with the number of the, yes, in any case, then if we put out a notice about that in my office, we would get some messages from abroad. That is the worst hypocritical comment I've ever heard, because you are out there to kill all people with Down syndrome. That is not the case. But there is the smallness of society comes into the fore here as well. There is an accepted notion that you screen, and when you screen, you see that the fetus may have or has Down syndrome, and then the mother and the parents take their decisions based on that. And that is allowed according to the law and according to societal acceptance in Iceland. Therefore, there are relatively few children with Down syndrome in Iceland, because you can see beforehand and make decisions based on that. I will never judge any individual who takes her or his decision in this way, but I still sense a bit of a sorrow, especially from the parents of children with Down syndrome, who see their own child happy, progressing, and enjoying a good life. And they will be maybe willing to say to others who might face a similar situation, this is not the worst thing that can happen in society. Remember that when you take your decision. And let everyone just judge for themselves without passing harsh criticism on others.